Now we will try to understand what is a futures contract through an example, friends. So as we know, futures contract is basically something that happens in an exchange, right? The exchange works as the clearinghouse and gives credit guarantee. So let's say there is a stock which is priced at $100. Now, based on this, a futures contract is created. A futures contract is created. This futures contract size is, let's say, $1,000. That means 10 stocks, right? Now there are two people who are trying to speculate over this stock. Okay, one thinks in 30 days the stock will move to 120, but he doesn't want to buy the stock directly. He wants to do it through the futures contract. Now another person is there who thinks in 30 days the stock price will be $70 is his speculation, and $120 is another person's speculation. They both want to get into this contract. Now what will they do? The long person, the long entity, buys this contract. So in this side is the buyer, and the short entity sells this contract. Here is the seller. Now neither the buyer nor the seller need to exchange $1,000 to enter into this contract. They just need to pay something called the initial margin. The initial margin. Let's say in this case it is $100. Right? So they both put in their accounts $100 each. $100 each they have put to enter into this contract. One is on the sell side, one is on the buy side. Now they both think in 30 days the end result will happen, right? 120 will happen in 30 days, the buyer thinks so, and $70 will happen in 30 days. The seller thinks so. So this contract also, let's say, expires in 30 days, and that is why they have entered this contract. Okay. Right now the time is T is equal to 0. The maturity period T is equal to capital T is equal to 30 days. Okay. Now a futures contract is, obviously this is happening through the exchange. There is no individual or person to person exchange happening here. It is happening through the exchange, right? Now this future contract through the exchange is marked to market at the end of each day. So let's say at the first day T is equal to 1, the stock price becomes 102. Okay. And for simplicity's sake, let us assume that the futures contract moves exactly in sync with the underlying. So the contract now is 1020. So what was $1,000 has become 1020. So the buyer is in the long side here. So he is in the profit. And how much he has profited? $20 at the end of the first day, right? Similarly, on the other hand, the seller is on the losing side and he has lost exactly $20. Okay. So this is how it is going at the end of the first day. Now let us say that at the end of the second day, the price of the stock from 102 moves to $108. The contract naturally has become 1080. And on the second day, the buyer gains another $60. And the seller loses another $60. So the seller is still now having a bad time. Now what is the amount left in their accounts at this point? The buyer has 100 plus 80, $180. Wow. And the seller has 100 minus 80, which is $20. This is also wow. Now there is a problem, friends. There is something called the maintenance margin. The maintenance margin is the minimum margin that an account needs to hold to stay in a futures contract. Now let's say in this case the maintenance margin was $60. Okay, it was $60. Now at the end of day one, the buyer had $120 in his account, in his or her account, and the seller had $80. So the maintenance margin was not breached for either, right? It was above 60 for both. But in this case, we have a maintenance margin breach, and that has been breached on part of the seller. This is a breach here, right? So the seller now has to make amends. And how does the seller make amends? The seller has to put back that much amount into the account, which brings the balance back up to the initial margin. So the seller now has to add $80 more, so that his account balance is $100, which is equal to the initial margin. So once the maintenance margin is breached, it is not the maintenance margin that has to be reached. It is the initial margin that has to be reached. So this is just to have a buffer, right? This is just to have a buffer. Now the seller may choose that the seller does not want to stay in the contract anymore. In that case, whatever losses are there, the seller has to bear and get out of the contract and close it. If there are some extra losses, that also has to be fulfilled and paid by the seller to get out of this contract. Otherwise, if the seller wants to remain in this contract, the seller has to pay $80 at this stage. This is the requirement. So this phenomenon is called margin call. This phenomenon is called margin call. So this thing has done a lot of harm in the markets to many entities, not only individuals. It has the capability of wiping out entire enterprises. This has happened before. Those who have speculated beyond a certain point without hedging it, or those who have taken too much risk without by having certain amount of confidence in their decisions, they have been wiped out because of certain changes in the markets which went contrary to their speculations, and margin calls happened and their accounts have been wiped out. This has happened before. So this phenomenon is famously known as margin call. So we have understood three terms here: margin call, maintenance margin, and initial margin. Initial margin. So what is the initial margin, friends? Initial margin is the initial amount that the buyer and seller of a futures contract need to pay in order to enter into the same, or in order to enter into the contract. Then there is maintenance margin. Maintenance margin is what? It is the minimum amount of balance that an account needs to have for the account holder to remain in that kind of futures contract. Now, what is margin call? Margin call is when the balance in the account falls below the maintenance margin. There is a requirement that one has to fulfill or refill the account so that it reaches back to the initial margin, not the maintenance margin. It has to reach back to the initial margin. This phenomenon is called the margin call. So we have understood majorly what are the points in a futures contract. Now we'll understand a few more terms related to the futures contract, and then we will try to understand the features of a futures contract, and in the end define futures contract. Now in futures contract there is something called the price limits. This is basically, let's say a contract right now is at a certain price X. There is an upper band and a lower band put on both sides of it. It cannot trade beyond this, right? And it cannot trade beyond this also. So this is called basically the price limits. If the price hits the upper limit, say somebody wants to trade somewhere here, then it hits the limit here. This phenomenon is called limit up. and the trading stops. Similarly, if somebody wants to trade, say, at some price like this, in this case the price hits the limit downwards. This is called limit down. And here also the trading stops. Now this stopping of the trading is called, now the stoppage of the trading is called lock limit. So again we have heard 4 new terms: price limits, limit up, limit down, and lock limits. To revise, there is a band within which a contract may trade. That band is basically called the price limits. Now if someone wants to trade at a value higher than the upper limit, then something called the limit up happens, as the upper limit is hit and the trade is stopped. And if somebody wants to trade at a price lower than the lower limit, then the price hits the lower limit in that case and limit down happens. A phenomenon called limit down happens, and again the trading stops. This phenomenon of the price hitting any of the limits and the trade stopping is called locked limit. Now, the price of the contract changing every day based on the performance of the underlying, this phenomenon is called marking to market. Now we have to understand what is the cumulative gain or the loss to the buyer or the seller at the end of the expiration if both hold on to the contract till expiration, right? So let's say at t is equal to 3, the price of the stock went to 90. Suddenly there is a sharp fall. Therefore, the contract went to $900, right? Because we are assuming that the contract is exactly moving in sync with the performance of the underlying, for simplicity's sake. In this case, the movement is 1080 to 90. 1080 to 900. So the total movement is $180. Now, what happens to the buyer's account? He was plus 180. Now he is minus 180. Straight away he has become minus 180. So his balance is 0. Right? Now what happens to the seller? For the seller it's a plus 180. So he was, let's say the seller was at $20, right? The seller was at $20 plus 180. This takes his account balance to plus $200. This is the situation of the seller after the third day. Now if you look at the entire phenomenon, what is happening? What is happening is basically the cumulative change is the total change. The total change is basically the cumulative change that happens across all the days of the contract, across the expiration. So let's say first day the change was plus 20 for the buyer, next day it was plus 60, next day it was minus 80, then it was plus 50, then it was plus 100. Summing all this up, whatever value comes up, that is basically the net gain or loss for the buyer. Same goes for the seller. The first day his loss was 20, second day his loss was 60, third day his profit was 180. Let's say, then again the loss was minus 50, then again the loss was minus 10. Summing all this up till the time the expiration happens, let's assuming that both of them hold on till expiration, whatever happens till the end, that is their gain or loss. And this will come to basically, now the value at expiration, considering expiration happens at capital T, this is given by the difference between value at contract initiation, which is F0, and value at contract maturity or expiration, which is F capital T. The difference between this, if capital T or the value at contract maturity is more, so if T is greater than F0, this implies the buyer or the long gains. If the reverse happens, that is F0 is greater than Ft, this implies that the seller or the short gains. So this is all about the futures contract that we just discussed. Okay. Now we will have a look at the features of it. We have discussed a few alongside this example. Now we will look at the theoretical part. Now we'll look at the features from a theoretical angle. So firstly, this is exchange traded. It is less flexible. It is more transparent. That is, privacy is less. And most importantly, there is credit guarantee provided by the clearinghouse. The credit guarantee is there. How does the clearinghouse guarantee credit and how has it not failed? So this is a point of direction. This is a point of contention, friends. So one way is it takes margins, right? It takes margins. And the second is it keeps price limits. So one thing is it takes margins as security deposits, right? Second thing is it has price limits. There are price bands of trading. So the exposure for any trade is limited within the band. These two factors help the credit or the clearinghouse keep the credit guarantee, and astonishingly they have been able to so far not fail in it. So therefore, from these phenomena or from these features, we will try to define what is a futures contract. A futures contract is an exchange traded standardized forward commitment with credit guarantee which binds a buyer and a seller of the contract to fulfill the mark-to-market conditions of the contract till expiration by maintaining the margin requirements, thereby bearing the cumulative gain or loss at expiration provided this stay till the expiration. So this can be a definition of a futures contract, friends. Now friends, before we move on to the next forward commitment, which is swaps, one question needs to be answered. So let us think about this question, friends. What is the exchange between the buyer and the seller at the initiation of a contract? We all have understood that at the end of the contract or on daily mark-to-markets, there is some exchange happening. But at the initiation, what is the exchange between the buyer and the seller? For a forward contract and also for a futures contract. The answer is the initial exchange. The initial exchange of the initial value is 0. There is no exchange. Both in case of a futures contract and in case of a forward contract. At t is equal to 0, the exchange or the value of the contract is 0. It is only after the performance of the underlying is deciphered at the end of the expiration or along the expiration, on the way to the expiration, that the value is decided. Even in case of a forward contract, the initial value or the initial exchange is 0. There is no initial exchange. So this is a very important aspect of both forward contract and futures contract.